G'day. I recently recorded a 5-piece band live in my lounge room, and I thought I could talk a little bit about some of the decisions that I made in preparing the room and microphone choices and the like to get the best capture of the performance I could. I'm Mark Lowry. I'm a musician and audio engineer, and I record primarily in my home. I'm in a band called The Great Unknown, and we wanted to record some songs played acoustically, but live and video. My main room for recording is probably too dead for maybe too small for a 5-piece acoustic. You want a little bit of room when you're recording acoustic instruments, but not too much, obviously, when you've got 5 of them all playing at once. So you want a bit of space, if you can create some space between them, to allow a little bit of isolation and manage some of the room reverberation. That's what you're sort of aiming for. So I moved the band into the lounge room, into my lounge room, which is normally where the TV is, and it's a fairly live room. The two things I really wanted to try and address in that room, first of all, was to try and manage the reverberation. So I put a few additional carpets down to help cover up the reflective slate tiles, and on the wall opposite where I was going to seat the band, I placed I've got several homemade absorption panels. I just ran them along the far wall, put a big blanket over the TV and a couple of big chairs in the corners, and drew the blinds on all the windows to try and help minimise a lot of that reflection. I couldn't treat the ceiling. I mean, it's our living room. And with all of the plaster wall in the room, it's not ideal, but I think we've got a reasonable sound out of it. So then I set the band up along the far wall, the longest wall in the room. I put the double bass in one corner and the drums down the other end. The double bass I put in up that end away from the drums, because it's not the loudest of instruments, and the drums are going to be more obvious in the microphones for the double bass than anywhere else. So I tried to separate them as much as I could, and I put the 2 guitars on the couch in the middle and the vocalist a little in front of them. For the double bass, I used 2 microphones. I used a Melbourne company called OPR microphones. They do a U87 clone that I really like. So I used that set to figure 8, which has a strong cancellation effect on the sides, so that would help minimise the bleed from the guitars and the drums and the like coming in the sides of the microphone. And I used a Sennheiser 602 II, which is a good bottom end capture microphone. The intent being that I would use the bottom end of that and wipe off all the tops, and then use either the U87 or the DI that I took as well from the double bass to give me some of the string definition sounds. On the drums up the other end, I used a Sennheiser D112 as a kick-in mic, and I didn't use a kick-out mic because it'd be too much room noise. Just kept it as simple as I could. On the snare, SM57s top and bottom, and as an overhead, I used as an Adelaide company called Nude microphones, and they do a simple ribbon mic, and I used that as an overhead. Again, the side cancellation to cut down the bleed from vocals and guitars and the like that were nearby. On the 2 guitars, ribbons again, for the same reasons again. Again, OPR in Melbourne, They make a Royal 121 clone, so I've used each of those on the two guitars. On the dobro, because it's got the cone speaker, I placed the ribbon in front of that, and the acoustic just off the 12th fret, the typical type of positioning. As musicians are prone to do, they move around when they're playing. So Dave on a double bass is moving it around a little bit, and at some point Charlie's mic's been moved in some way, which meant that it got a bit more vocal bleed than I had wanted. But you have to live with what you get in the end. And then Melinda's vocals were done through a Sennheiser MD441, which is a hypercardioid type narrow focus microphone. So let's have a look at the session. Okay, so here are the multi-tracks. I've switched off all of my processing on these tracks, bar a limiter on the master bus, just to bring the overall levels up a bit. If we listen to the individual instruments, so let's start. I've got 4 drum tracks, there's 3 bass tracks, 1 acoustic, 1 for the dobro. The dobro DI didn't work because the tuner was still switched on, blocking the signal. We didn't pick that up until afterwards. And the 1 vocal track. So the drums, so a little bit of vocal bleed, but not much else. They're pretty clean otherwise. He's not whacking into them because we're playing acoustically in the one room, and he's balancing what he's playing against what we're playing. But yeah, so those on their own, that's quite usable. The bass tracks, if I just go through these individually, this is the Sennheiser 602 II. So a little bit of vocal bleed, but not a lot, but there's not much else in that. So you can hear a little bit of hi-hat. Yeah, I think that's mainly, I'm using that mainly for bottom end, so that's a pretty good sound. The U87 picks up a bit more of the room. It's set to figure 8, but I think the opposing side of the microphone was picking up drums and vocals and stuff at a level that made it harder to use. So in the end I went with the Sennheiser and the DI blended, and I used the DI to give it a little bit of the top end sound of the bass. So I think together they came up pretty well. Then we've got my acoustic guitar. Now that again is a bit of vocal in that, but you can also hear the kick drum. Remember the microphone for the acoustic guitar was only 1.5 feet from the drum, so it's getting a lot of that boom, the bottom end of the kick drum. So in treating it, I've high-passed it to about 100 hertz to try and minimise the oomph of the kick coming in. So that cleans up that track. But a thing to remember when you're mixing multi-track recording where there's a lot of bleed if you change your EQ on one microphone, that can impact the sound of another instrument, because you're taking something of that instrument away from that microphone. So in this instance, when I took the bottom end off this guitar, the bottom end off the drums was impacted. So I've had to flip the phase on this guitar to bring the bottom end back in, take away the impact on the bottom end of the drums overall. So when you're doing this sort of mixing, you've got to keep those sorts of things in mind. So if I flip the phase back to not where it was, this is. And if you can hear more bottom end there. But if I take it out of the acoustic guitar, just high pass the acoustic guitar at 100. Where's the bottom end in the kick gone? In all the drum notes. But if I flip the phase in this guy, it's back in, it's not cancelling out. So just something to bear in mind, that when you've got multi-track live mics that have bleed from other instruments, you've got to be conscious of the impact one can have over the sound of another instrument. So I have to flip the phase on that acoustic guitar just to negate the impact it was having on the bottom end of the kick drum. Then there was the resonator. And similarly, a bit of vocal bleed, but the microphone had been moved at some point, and not being an engineer alone, having been a member of the band, I didn't realise it had been moved, and so it was not quite positioned where I wanted it to be, so it's got a bit more vocal in it, but it's manageable and you can make that work. And the vocal, which is the 441 Sennheiser.
Your body, something's gotta change. You are the reason I've been waiting.
There's not a lot of bleed in that. It's a hypercardioid, so even the guitars aren't really that present in that, so it's not bad. The main concern will be that the vocals are in a lot of other mics, so just making sure I'm not impacting that when I'm treating those microphones. So the ribbon mics allowed for separation within individual tracks to a high degree, bearing in mind some instruments like the acoustic guitars right beside the drums, there's going to be a fair bit of bleed, and you just got to work out a way of living with it or managing it in a way that's acceptable. Sometimes you just got to live with the way it's come out. So most of my EQ work will be high passing and a little bit of compression and the like, but again, once you've got other instruments in a microphone, too much compression brings them up more than you might want. So you've got to manage all of that. If you want me to do a walkthrough of all of the processing I've done on the finished recording, just let me know in the comments and I can do that as well. The finished mix is in a separate video that you can check out. So hope you got something out of that. Leave a comment if you've got any questions. Like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and hope to see you another time. Thanks.